Church History 1, Lecture 3, Part B. Is it B? The second one? Yeah, second one. All right, we're going to finish this up here. The first 5 centuries were a history of Baptists. So finally, we get into the Baptist history, right? Well, just a little bit here. This is one of my favorite parts of history of true churches, is what the church historians that weren't Baptists said about Baptists. And online students, you may, and probably most of you have never heard these before, and realize these church historians are well-known, excuse me, well-respected church historians of their stripe, Lutheran or whatever they are, over the centuries. Okay, we will close this lecture by looking at some incredible statements by famous non-Baptist historians. These statements will open eyes to the reality that there were indeed Baptists, Anabaptists, and other names, churches way back in those first 5 centuries that weren't aligned with the Catholic Church, that were believing like we believe today. Who? Not just any Christian church, like Baptists believe today. Despite the powerful, bloodthirsty Roman pagan church system that was dominating Europe and beyond, it was killing them by the millions. Moshin, the outstanding Lutheran historian, Moshin, he said this: "Before the rise of Luther and Calvin, there lay secreted in almost all the countries of Europe persons who adhered tenaciously to the principles of the modern Dutch Baptists. The origin of Baptists is lost in the remote depths of antiquity. The first century was a history of Baptists." That's an amazing statement by a Lutheran historian. Zwingli, who did not like Baptists at all, a Presbyterian co-laborer with John Calvin, said, "The institution of the Anabaptists is no novelty, but for 1,300 years has caused great disturbance in the church, and has acquired such strength that the attempt in this age to contend with it appears futile for a time." So this was written around 1500, for 1,300 years, so all the way back to 200 AD. But what does he know, right? He's just a church historian. Robert Barclay, Quaker historian, said, "We shall afterwards show that the rise of the Anabaptists took place prior to the Reformation of the Church of England. And there are also reasons for believing that on the continent of Europe, small hidden Christian societies who have held many of the opinions of the Anabaptists have existed from the times of the apostles. In the sense of the direct transmission of divine truth and the true nature of spiritual religion, it seems probable that these churches have a lineage of succession more ancient than that of the Roman Church," which is way back into the 5th century. That's a Quaker. Sir Isaac Newton, he said, "The Baptists are the only body of known Christians that have never symbolized with Rome." And I totally agree with that. Now we have the non-denoms today and some weird offshoots. But most of those come back to a Protestant-like church system that they were trained in and came out of. John Ridpath, a Methodist historian, famous one, he said, "I should not readily admit that there was a Baptist church as far back as 8100, though without a doubt there were Baptists in, as all Christians were then Baptists." Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge, History of Dutch Reformed Church, Dr. Dermot, chaplain to the King of Holland, and Dr. Rupege, professor of theology at Groningen in 1819, they were commissioned by the King's order to prepare a history of the Dutch Reformed Church, which was the State Church of Holland. Well, that's great. Well, the history was prepared under the royal sanction and published officially. It witnesses the antiquity and orthodoxy not of the Dutch Reformed establishment, but of Dutch Baptists. Here's what they reported to the king: "We have now seen that the Baptists, who were formerly called Anabaptists, were the original Waldenses, and have long in history received the honor of that origin. On this account, the Baptists may be considered the only Christian community which has stood since the apostles, and as a Christian society which has preserved pure the doctrines of the gospel through the ages." Who? Not the Dutch Reformed folks, Baptists. We're getting all different types of views here. Edinburgh Cyclopedia, Presbyterian. And you can look up these sources to see if they have any legitimacy. They do. It must have already occurred to our readers that the Baptists are the same sect of Christians that were formerly described as Anabaptists. Indeed, this seems to have been their leading principle from the time of Tertullian, to the present time. Tertullian was born just 50 years after the death of the Apostle John. And my favorite is this one, Cardinal Hosius, Catholic. He was who? President of the Council of Trent. That council hated Baptists. Wow. Back in 1545. He said, "Were it not for the fact that the Baptists have been grievously tormented and cut off with a knife during the past 1200 years, they would swarm greater than all the reformers. If the truth of religion were to be judged by the readiness and boldness of which a man or any sect shows in suffering, then the opinions and persuasions of no sect can be truer and surer than those of the Anabaptists, since there have been none for the 1200 years past that have been more generally punished, or that have been more cheerfully and steadfastly undergone, and have offered themselves to the most cruel sort of punishment than these people." Past 1200 years. There it is again, back to about 345 AD. He's a Catholic, president of the Council of Trent. Famous church historians have agreed that Baptists predate the Roman Catholic Church system, so that puts them way back in the first couple centuries. And some of these are right here. Just memorize their names. Cardinal Hosius, Ridpath, Barclay, Zwingli, Mosham. So online students, if this is all new to you, you need to study this out. You will, as we go further into church history and get into the Baptist church history, you'll learn about it. But it's real, it's true. You just won't find it in most church history books, because it's a history tainted by and controlled by Catholics and Protestants.